I am Julius Beaumont. I am 70 years old. And just 3 months after I buried my wife, my own sons had me declared mentally incompetent and kicked me out of my home. Now I drive a cab at 2 in the morning, my back aching just to afford a tiny, damp studio apartment. I used to be the chief engineer for the city of Chicago. I built the bridges these people drive on. Last night I picked up a passenger, an old man from the Gold Coast. He got to the car, looked through the glass at my face, and he froze. His hands started to tremble. He got in, but he couldn't speak. Finally, he whispered, You have to be a Garcia, don't you? From Pilsen." I told him my name was Beaumont. He shook his head, tears in his eyes. "No, I'm not mistaken. I've been searching for your family for 60 years. What he told me next, what he showed me inside his private safe, it didn't just change my life. It revealed a secret history, a hidden fortune, and a truth about my father that my sons in their greed just unleashed. If you are listening to this story, please let me know in the comments where in the world you are. Hit that like button and subscribe because you will not believe what happened next." The kitchen was too quiet. That's the first thing I noticed. The silence. It had become a living thing in the 3 months since Diane passed. A heavy, suffocating presence that filled the spaces she used to occupy with her laughter and the smell of her cornbread. Diane, my wife of 45 years, gone. 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. I counted. Time was the only thing left that still seemed to move. Today, that silence was broken, not by a memory, but by the dry final thud of a thick stack of papers hitting my oak kitchen table. The table Diane and I bought with our first real paycheck. My eldest son Terrence stood over it, his expensive suit worn like armor. Beside him, his wife Amber. My daughter-in-law, a sharp blonde woman with eyes that calculated everything and saw the value of nothing. She smiled at me, a perfect white plastic smile that never ever reached her eyes. It was a simulation of warmth. They didn't even say hello. They just sat as if this were a scheduled corporate eviction, and I was the last item on the agenda. "Dad." Amber began, her voice syrupy sweet, the one she used to close deals. "We know how hard this has been. So hard, but there are procedures, just some loose ends we need to tie up." I just nodded. Procedures. Ever since Diane died, everything was a procedure. The death certificate, the funeral home, the bank, cold, sterile words for an immeasurable, scalding loss. She pushed the stack toward me, its shadow falling over a coffee ring Diane had made years ago. "This is just to consolidate your assets and Mom's, to simplify things." Terrence, the boy I taught to throw a curveball, the boy whose scraped knees I'd cleaned, just sat there, silent. He crossed his arms over his chest, a wall of pinstripe and ambition. "Amber's right, Dad," he said, his voice a monotone. "It's just easier if I manage things. You won't have to worry about bills or the investments or anything." "Manage?" I asked. My voice was rough, gravelly, not from age but from disuse. "Manage what?" "Everything." Amber jumped in, not letting her husband stumble. "It's just a formality, Dad," she repeated. She placed a heavy, gold-plated pen on top of the stack. "You just need to sign here, here, and at the bottom." I squinted. The fine print blurred. I spent my entire life reading blueprints, city contracts, structural integrity reports. I was the chief engineer for the city of Chicago. I know what legal documents look like. I know how words are weaponized, how they're arranged to hide intent. I ignored the jargon and looked straight at the title. It was not consolidation of assets. It was not power of attorney. It was an irrevocable quit-claim deed. A chill colder than the Chicago wind snaked up my spine. "This is a quit-claim deed," I said. My voice was no longer gravelly. It was steel. "You're asking me to sign away my house." Amber's smile faltered. Just for a millisecond, a tiny crack in the porcelain mask, but she was a professional. Her face instantly softened into a mask of pity. "Oh, Dad," she sighed, reaching out as if to pat my hand. I pulled it away like she was a hot stove. "You see, this is what we mean. You're confused. You're mixing things up. It's not signing away. It's protecting. Protecting the asset from taxes, from probate. Terrence will be the administrator. It's still your house." "If it's still my house," I said, my eyes locking onto hers, "then why do I need to sign it over to you, Dad?" Terrence cut in, his voice rising with an impatience he barely tried to conceal. "You're making this more complicated than it is." "I need my lawyer to see this," I said. I pushed the stack back. The heavy pen rolled off and clattered onto the floor. The silence that returned was different. It wasn't empty. It was pressurized. It was the air in the room right before a lightning strike. Terrence slammed his open palm on the table. The bam made the coffee mugs jump. "Dad, damn it, you're doing it again." He shot up from his chair, the legs screeching a protest against the linoleum. "What do you think we're doing trying to steal from you?" He paced the kitchen, a stranger in the room he grew up in. "Mom warned me. She said you were getting forgetful. She said you were stubborn. You couldn't even remember where you left your keys last week. You called me at 3 a.m. asking if it was Tuesday." I flinched. He was right. The grief was a fog. It choked my memory. Some days I'd wake up and not know where I was, only that Diane wasn't there. It was a physical ache. Amber stood up, but she was smarter. She used a different weapon. She circled the table, came up behind me, and placed her cold hands on my shoulders. "Julius," she whispered, her voice full of fake sympathy. "We love you, you know that. But you're just not, well, you're not in a place to make these big decisions." She let that hang in the air. "Not well. If you don't sign," she continued, her tone shifting, the steel emerging from the velvet, "we'll be forced to go to court. We won't have a choice. We'll have to petition for a conservatorship based on your mental state." Conservatorship, that was the word they use for men who can't feed themselves, the word they use for the truly broken. "You really want to do that?" Amber asked, her voice a brilliant performance of a reluctant daughter. "You want to stand in front of a judge, have a stranger declare you incompetent? You want to embarrass this family, all because you're being difficult?" "Conservatorship," I repeated. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "It's the only other option, Dad," Terrence said, his voice suddenly full of a false, heavy exhaustion, as if he were the victim. "Either you trust your son, trust that we are doing what's best for you, what Diane would have wanted. You leave your mother out of this," I growled. "She agreed with me," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the cabinets. "She knew you'd be like this. She knew you'd fight. She wanted you to be taken care of." It was a knockout blow, a lie or a truth. Diane had kept from me. Had she too seen me as a faltering old man? I looked at her picture on the fridge, the one from our 25th anniversary. We had promised, in sickness and in health. My eyes darted to the kitchen doorway. My youngest son, Corey, was standing there. He'd always been the softer one, the one who hid behind his older brother. How long had he been there? His eyes were wide, terrified, a deer in the headlights. "Corey," I said. My voice was a plea. Corey jumped. He looked at Terrence, he looked at Amber, and then he looked at the floor. He couldn't meet my gaze. He didn't say a word. His silence was the answer. His silence was the betrayal. The humiliation was a physical pain sharper than my grief for Diane. To be seen as a burden, a problem to be managed, an old fool who couldn't be trusted with his own life. My hand was shaking. I didn't have any fight left. Not today. The fog of grief was too thick. I reached for the pen on the floor. "I knew you'd see." Amber smiled, patting my shoulder. The victor's smile. I signed my name, Julius Beaumont. A name that used to mean something. A name that built bridges. Now it was just a scribble on a bill of surrender. Terrence let out a breath, a long sigh of relief. Amber scooped up the papers like a hawk grabbing its prey. She checked every signature. "Good," she said. "All business. That's done. We'll handle everything from here. You just rest, Dad." They were gone in less than a minute. No hug, no "I love you." The front door clicked shut. The silence rushed back in. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was empty. I sat at that table for an hour, staring at Diane's picture. "I signed sweetheart," I whispered. I had given them the keys to my kingdom. And I didn't know it then, but in that moment I hadn't just lost my house. I had lost everything. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a studio apartment on the south side. The smell of damp carpet and stale cigarettes hit me the moment I opened the door. This, Terrence had explained, was a more manageable living situation for a retiree. It was a single room with a kitchenette that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 70s, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. My home, the one I'd shared with Diane for 45 years, the one my sons grew up in, was sold in 1 week. A cash offer, Dad, we couldn't refuse, Terrence had said, not looking me in the eye. They told me the proceeds, $1.2 million, had been placed in a secure trust that Terrence and Amber would manage for my benefit. My benefit. My benefit, it turned out, was a monthly allowance of $1,500, just enough to cover the rent on this dump and buy groceries. Barely. My own retirement savings gone. Wiped out by the last 2 years of Diane's medical bills. The cancer had taken my wife, and the cost of fighting it had taken my security. I had poured every penny I had into giving her 1 more month, 1 more week, 1 more day. I didn't regret a single dollar. But now I was here. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the only furniture in the room. I picked up my phone and called Corey. He was the soft one. Maybe he would listen. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice hesitant. Hello, Dad. Corey. Son, what's going on? Why did you let this happen? I heard him take a shaky breath. I could hear traffic in the background. Dad, I told you. Terrence said it was for the best. Amber, she has a degree in finance, Dad. They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing, I yelled into the phone, my voice echoing in the small, empty room. They're stealing Corey. This is theft. They sold my house. They put me in this box. Dad, don't say that. Terrence said you were having trouble, that you were confused. I'm not confused, I roared. I'm broke. They made me broke. I have to go. Dad, Corey stammered. I have a meeting. The line clicked. He hung up on me. I stared at the phone. $1,500 a month. I did the math. The rent, the utilities, food, my heart medication. It wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. I was 70 years old, a widower, a former chief engineer, and I was destitute. My back ached from the stress. I looked at my phone, the screen still lit up, and I saw the app I'd downloaded months ago when I was waiting for Diane at one of her chemo appointments. A silly what-if at the time. I opened the Uber app. My driver profile was still there. Julius B., a smiling 5-year-old photo. My fingers trembled, but I hit the button. Go online. I had to drive. 6 months later. It was 2:15 in the morning and the rain was lashing against the windshield of my 2018 Camry. My lower back was a knot of fire. Another passenger, another drunk finance bro I'd picked up from River North, was snoring in the back seat. This was my life now. I used to design the bridges that held this city together. Now I ferried its drunk and its lonely across them night after night for scraps. I dropped the kid off in Lincoln Park and checked the app. $32 for an hour of my time. I sighed, the sound lost in the drumming of the rain. I'd tried calling Terrence last week. I needed a little extra just to cover a dental bill. An old filling had fallen out. Amber answered as she always did. Oh, Dad, Julius. She'd cooed, her voice dripping with fake concern. Terrence is in a very important meeting. You know you're not supposed to bother him about money. The trust is performing beautifully. You just don't worry your head about it. She talked to me like I was a child, like I was an idiot. I was about to log off to go back to my damp, cold room when the app chimed. A new ride, a good one. Pick up at the Gold Coast, drop off at the same location. Probably a doorman calling a car for a resident. The fare estimate was high. I needed the money. I sighed, put the car in gear and drove north. I pulled up to a towering glass building, one of those places where the lobby is bigger than my entire apartment. The doorman, bundled in a heavy coat, nodded at me. A minute later, an older man walked out. He looked to be in his 80s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit and overcoat even at this hour. He carried himself with an air of quiet power. He walked to the car and I hit the button to unlock the back door. But he didn't get in. He stopped. He just stopped. He stared at me. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see his face. He wasn't just looking. He was staring. I got annoyed. Hey, buddy, you getting in? I lowered the passenger window. The meter's running. The man stumbled forward as if in a daze. He ignored the back door and pulled open the front passenger door. He leaned in his face, inches from mine. His eyes, dark and intense, scanned my face like he was reading a map he'd lost long ago. And then he started to tremble, a violent shudder that ran through his whole body. Madre de Dios, he whispered, his accent thick and Cuban. It cannot be. Hey, are you okay? I asked, starting to get worried. You need me to call someone? He shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. You are a Garcia, right? You must be. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You got the wrong guy, friend. Name's Julius Beaumont. I'm as American as it gets. No, the man said, his voice shaking with an emotion I couldn't place. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. I am not wrong about the name, but I am wrong about the face. You are the son. You are Amos's son, aren't you? My heart stopped. It hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Amos. That was my father's name. A man who died when I was 15. A man I barely remembered. How do you know my father's name? The man's tears finally spilled over. My name, he said, his voice thick, is Rafael Castillo. I have been searching for your family for 60 years. Please, turn off the meter. I will pay you $1,000 just to listen. $1,000. The words hung in the air, seeming to push back the sound of the rain. $1,000. That was more than I made in 2 weeks of driving this cab. It was rent. It was food. It was a lifeline. My hand calloused from gripping the steering wheel, and before that, decades of holding drafting pencils moved automatically. I reached down and tapped the End Ride button on the app. The meter's glow vanished. The car plunged into an even deeper silence, broken only by the man's shaky breathing. Get in, I said, my voice hoarse. Get out of the rain. Rafael Castillo didn't move for a second. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with a kind of awe and a deep, profound sadness. He finally slid into the passenger seat, bringing the smell of expensive wool and the cold night air with him. He shut the door, and suddenly my old Camry felt like a confession booth. He didn't hand me any money. He just sat, his hands trembling in his lap, and stared out the windshield. Amos, he said, his voice a whisper. His name was Amos Beaumont, but I never knew him by that name. I waited. My heart was still a frantic drum against my ribs. Amos, my father, he was a ghost, a faded photograph on my mother's dresser. A tall, quiet man who worked for the railroad, smelled of machine oil and tobacco, and died of a heart attack on a factory floor when I was 15. That was the whole story. That was all I'd ever known. You said, Garcia. I prompted, my voice softer now. You said he was a Garcia. Rafael turned to look at me. His eyes were clear even through the tears. He told me his name was Garcia. Amos Garcia. Why? I asked. Why would he do that? Rafael took a deep, shuddering breath. To understand Julius, you must understand Chicago. Not this Chicago, he said, gesturing at the glass and steel towers of the Gold Coast. Not the city of bright lights. You must understand the Chicago of 1963, the Chicago of the shadows. He settled back in the seat, a man preparing to unburden himself of a story he had held for a lifetime. I was 20 years old, he began. I had just come from Cuba, fled, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a head full of dreams about American steel. I am a machinist by trade, or I was. I saved every penny I could, washing dishes, cleaning floors, and I finally opened a small shop, a tiny one-room garage in Pilsen. I knew Pilsen. It was different now, full of art galleries and expensive taquerias. But back then it was a rough neighborhood, a place where you kept your head down. It was a good shop. Rafael's voice filled with a distant pride. Castillo Mechanics, I worked hard, too hard. I started to do well. And in that neighborhood in those days, doing well meant you attracted attention. He paused, his eyes clouding over. They came on a Friday, a group of men, Irish from Bridgeport. They offered me protection, for a fee I could not possibly pay. I knew this story. It was the old story of Chicago. I told them no, Rafael said simply. I was young, I was proud, I was stupid. I told them this was America. I was my own man. He let out a short, bitter laugh. They didn't argue, they just smiled, and they left. The next night I smelled smoke. I stared at him, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The rain hammered against the roof, a frantic drumming that matched the beat of my heart. Smoke. Raphael nodded, his eyes losing focus, looking past me back 60 years. By the time the fire trucks arrived, it was too late. Everything gone. My machines, my tools, my dreams. All just a pile of twisted, smoking metal. I had poured every cent, every drop of sweat into that shop. I was destroyed. He pressed his lips together, a man reliving the worst moment of his life. I didn't have insurance. I didn't have family. I had nothing. I sat on the curb across the street all night, just watching the last embers die. The sun came up. The street was covered in ash and gray, wet dawn light. And I just sat there. I had no idea what to do. I was 20 years old in a foreign country, and I was utterly, completely defeated. I remember thinking, they won. The bullies always win. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. And then he appeared. Who? I whispered. Your father, Amos. He just walked up. I had never seen him before. He was a tall man, strong. You have his eyes, you know, the same intensity. He looked like you. He wasn't wearing a suit like the Irish. He was wearing work clothes, clean but worn, the clothes of a man who builds things. I was scared. I thought he was a looter, or maybe someone else come to kick me while I was down. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there looking at the wreckage. He looked at the burned sign, Castillo Mechanics. Then he looked at me sitting on the curb covered in soot, probably crying. I don't remember. Finally, he just nodded as if he'd come to a decision. He walked over to me. I tensed up. He reached into the pocket of his heavy canvas jacket, and he pulled out an envelope, a simple brown envelope. It was thick. He didn't hand it to me, Raphael said, holding up his trembling hand as if to demonstrate. He pushed it into the chest pocket of my jacket. Right here. This, he said. And his voice was deep like thunder rolling far away. This is a down payment on a better city. I was too stunned to speak. I just looked at him. I don't understand, I managed to say. He pointed at the burned shop. They think they own this. They think they can burn down what they're afraid of. They're wrong. Then he looked back at me. You're a builder, so build it again. Build it bigger. Build it so strong they can never touch it. I finally opened the envelope. It was full of cash. I had never seen so much money in my life. It must have been, I don't know, thousands. Enough, more than enough to rebuild, to buy new machines. My mind was reeling. This wasn't the man I knew. No, I said, shaking my head. That's impossible. My father, Amos, he was a railroad worker. He was poor. We were poor. We never had any money. When he died, my mother, she had to scrub floors to keep us fed. That man you're describing, that's not my father. Raphael looked at me with a profound sadness. He was poor, he agreed, nodding slowly. But he was not broke. There is a difference, Julius. He was rich in a way that had nothing to do with dollars. He was rich in intelligence and in foresight. I tried to give the money back. Raphael continued, his voice thick with the memory. I said, I can't take this. Who are you? Why are you doing this? And that, Raphael said, tapping his finger on the dashboard, is when it happened. He looked at me and his eyes were dangerous. It doesn't matter who I am, he said. But if you must call me something, call me Garcia. Garcia? I repeated. Why, that's a Spanish name. Exactly, Raphael said, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. I asked him, why Garcia? And your father, this tall black man. He looked down at me, this small Cuban boy, and he said, it was my mother's name. Her mother's name. The name of a slave who got herself free. It reminds me that we, people like us, we have to protect our own. Because no one else is going to. The words hit me like a physical blow. We have to protect our own. I thought of Terrence, I thought of Amber, I thought of my own son Corey looking at the floor. He gave me the money, Raphael said, pulling me back from my dark thoughts. And he made me promise 2 things. He held up one gnarled finger. First, I was to tell no one, not my wife, not my children, no one. He said the money was invisible. It came from the shadows, and it must stay in the shadows. He said, men like me. We cannot be seen to have power. It makes other men nervous. It makes them cruel. And I understood. I took the money. I rebuilt my shop. In 1 year, I had paid back every cent, but he wouldn't take it. What? He refused. I found him at the railroad yard. I tried to give him the envelope. He pushed it back. He said, that was not a loan. It was an investment. In you. In us. You pay me back by succeeding. You pay me back by becoming so powerful they can never burn you again. So I did. I took that money, and I built Castillo Metals, the billion-dollar corporation. It was built on my father's secret. And the second promise, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What was the second promise? Raphael's face grew somber. He turned in his seat, facing me fully. He said, I have a son. His name is Julius. He's a good boy, but he's soft, like his mother. He believes the world is fair. He believes family is everything. He doesn't have the... And then he searched for the word. He doesn't have the Garcia in him. Raphael's eyes locked on mine. He said, one day I will be gone, and one day the vultures will come. They always do, and they won't come from the street like you're Irish. They will come from inside his own house. They will have his name. They will have his trust. He made me promise, he made me swear, that if that day ever came, if I ever heard that his family, his own blood, was circling, I was to find you. I was to find Julius, and I was to give you this. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Give me what did he leave? Raphael didn't answer. He simply said, my penthouse is in this building. I have been holding something for you, for your father, for 60 years. I have a safe, an old safe. The key is waiting. He looked at me, this stranger who knew more about my father than I ever did. Julius Beaumont, I think the vultures, I think they have finally arrived. I am not a fool, not usually, but those words, $1,000, they hung in the air and seemed to stop the rain. $1,000. That was more than I made in 2 weeks of this back-breaking, soul-crushing work. It was my rent. It was my medication. It was air. My hand calloused from decades of holding both a drafting pencil, and now the steering wheel moved on its own. I reached down to the glowing phone screen and tapped End Ride. The meter vanished. The car was suddenly dark quiet, save for the sound of the man's ragged breathing and the drumming of the rain on the roof. Get in, I said. My voice was rough. Get out of the rain. He didn't move for a second, just stared at me, his eyes filled with a strange, heavy awe, and a sadness so deep it looked like a physical wound. He finally slid into the passenger seat, bringing in the scent of cold night air and expensive wool. He shut the door, and my old Camry suddenly felt like a confessional. He didn't offer me any money. He just sat his hands in his lap, staring through the windshield. Amos, he said the name a whisper. His name was Amos Beaumont, but I never knew him by that name. I waited. My heart was that frantic bird beating its wings against my ribs. Amos, my father, a ghost in a worn railroad jacket, a man who smelled of machine oil and died of a heart attack on a factory floor when I was 15. That was the story. That was all I had. You said Garcia, I prompted, my voice low. You said he was a Garcia. Raphael turned, his dark eyes locking onto mine. He told me his name was Garcia. Amos Garcia. Why? I asked. That makes no sense. Why would he use a Spanish name? Raphael took a deep, shuddering breath. To understand Julius, you must understand Chicago. Not this Chicago, he said, waving a hand at the gleaming towers of the Gold Coast. not the city of bright lights. You must understand the Chicago of 1963, the Chicago of the shadows. He settled back into the seat, a man unburdening himself of a story held for a lifetime. I was 20 years old, he began. I had just fled Cuba. I had nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a head full of dreams about American steel. I am a machinist by trade. I saved every penny I made washing dishes, cleaning floors. And I finally opened a small shop, a tiny one-room garage in Pilsen. I knew Pilsen. It's trendy now, all art galleries and expensive tacos, but back then it was a hard place, a place you kept your head down. It was a good shop, Raphael's voice filled with a distant pride. Castillo Mechanics. I worked hard, too hard. I started to do well, and in that neighborhood in those days, doing well attracted the wrong kind of attention. He paused, his eyes clouding over. They came on a Friday, a group of men, Irish from Bridgeport. They offered me protection, for a fee I could not possibly pay. I knew this story. It was the old, ugly story of the city. I told them no, Raphael said simply. I was young, I was proud, I was stupid. I told them this was America. I was my own man. He let out a short, bitter laugh. They didn't argue, they just smiled. And they left. The next night I smelled smoke. He stopped. The only sound was the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the windshield wipers. By the time the fire trucks arrived, it was gone. He said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Everything. My machines, my tools, my dreams. All of it just a pile of twisted, smoking metal. I had poured every cent, every drop of sweat into that shop. I was destroyed. He pressed his lips together, his jaw tight. I had no insurance. I had no family here. I had nothing. I sat on the curb across the street all night just watching the last embers die. The sun came up. The street was covered in ash and gray, wet dawn light. And I just sat there. I had no idea what to do. I was 20 years old in a foreign country and I was utterly defeated. I remember thinking, they won. The bullies always win. He leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorial. And then he appeared. Who? I whispered. Your father, Amos. He just walked up. I had never seen him before. He was a tall man, strong. You have his eyes, you know, the same intensity. He looked like you. He wasn't wearing a suit like the Irish. He was wearing work clothes, clean but worn, the clothes of a man who builds things. I was scared, Raphael admitted. I thought he was a looter, or maybe someone else come to kick me while I was down. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there looking at the wreckage. He looked at the burned sign, Castillo Mechanics. Then he looked at me sitting on the curb covered in soot, probably crying, but I don't remember. Finally, he just nodded as if he'd come to a decision. He walked over to me. I tensed up. He reached into the pocket of his heavy canvas jacket, and he pulled out an envelope. A simple brown envelope. It was thick. He didn't hand it to me, Raphael said, holding up his trembling hand as if to demonstrate. He pushed it into the chest pocket of my jacket. Right here. This, he said. And his voice was deep, like thunder rolling far away. This is a down payment on a better city. I was too stunned to speak. I just looked at him. I don't understand, I managed to say. He pointed at the burned shop. They think they own this. They think they can burn down what they're afraid of. They're wrong. Then he looked back at me. You're a builder, so build it again. Build it bigger. Build it so strong they can never touch it. I finally opened the envelope. It was full of cash. I had never seen so much money in my life. It must have been, I don't know, thousands. Enough. More than enough to rebuild, to buy new machines. My mind was reeling. This wasn't the man I knew. No, I said, shaking my head. That's impossible. My father, Amos. He was a railroad worker. He was poor. We were poor. We never had any money. When he died, my mother She had to scrub floors to keep us fed. That man you're describing, that's not my father. Raphael looked at me with a profound sadness. He was poor, he agreed, nodding slowly. But he was not broke. There is a difference, Julius. He was rich in a way that had nothing to do with dollars. He was rich in intelligence and in foresight. I tried to give the money back. Raphael continued, his voice thick with the memory. I said, I can't take this. Who are you? Why are you doing this? And that, Raphael said, tapping his finger on the dashboard, is when it happened. He looked at me and his eyes were dangerous. It doesn't matter who I am, he said. But if you must call me something, call me Garcia. Garcia, I repeated. Why, that's a Spanish name. Exactly, Raphael said, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. I asked him, why Garcia? And your father, this tall black man? He looked down at me, this small Cuban boy, and he said, it was my mother's name. Her mother's name. The name of a slave who got herself free. It reminds me that we, people like us, we have to protect our own, because no one else is going to. The words hit me like a physical blow. We have to protect our own. I thought of Terrence. I thought of Amber. I thought of my own son Corey looking at the floor. He gave me the money, Raphael said, pulling me back from my dark thoughts. And he made me promise two things. He held up one gnarled finger. First, I was to tell no one. Not my wife, not my children. No one. He said the money was invisible. It came from the shadows and it must stay in the shadows. He said, men like me, we cannot be seen to have power. It makes other men nervous. It makes them cruel. And I understood. I took the money. I rebuilt my shop. In 1 year I had paid back every cent, but he wouldn't take it. What? He refused. I found him at the railroad yard. I tried to give him the envelope. He pushed it back. He said, that was not a loan. It was an investment in you, in us. You pay me back by succeeding. You pay me back by becoming so powerful they can never burn you again. So I did. I took that money, and I built Castillo Metals, the billion-dollar corporation. It was built on my father's secret. And the second promise, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What was the second promise? Raphael's face grew somber. He turned in his seat, facing me fully. He said, I have a son. His name is Julius. He's a good boy, but he's soft, like his mother. He believes the world is fair. He believes family is everything. He doesn't have the... And then he searched for the word. He doesn't have the Garcia in him. Raphael's eyes locked on mine. He said, one day I will be gone, and one day the vultures will come. They always do. And they won't come from the street like you're Irish. They will come from inside his own house. They will have his name. They will have his trust. He made me promise. He made me swear that if that day ever came, if I ever heard that his family, his own blood was circling, I was to find you. I was to find Julius, and I was to give you this. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Give me what did he leave? Raphael didn't answer. He simply said, my penthouse is in this building. I have been holding something for you. For your father. For 60 years. I have a safe. An old safe. The key. The key is waiting. He looked at me, this stranger, who knew more about my father than I ever did. Julius Beaumont. I think the vultures. I think they have finally arrived. We sat there in the cab, the engine off, the only sound, the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the windshield wipers pushing away the rain. My world had just tilted on its axis. My father, Amos, a man I remembered as a silent, tired presence. A man who, according to this stranger, moved like a king in the shadows. My penthouse is in this building, Raphael said again, his voice pulling me from my daze. He gestured to the glass tower above us. I have something I've held for your father for 60 years. An old safe. He gave me a key, but he kept one for himself. He said, He said the key I have is for me, but the key he kept, that one was for you. I couldn't speak. I just followed him. I, Julius Beaumont, in my worn-out coat that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation, followed this billionaire Rafael Castillo out of my taxi. He didn't just have the doorman hold the door. He dismissed the doorman as if he didn't want a witness to what was about to happen. We rode up in a private elevator, all polished mahogany and silent high-speed mechanics. It was a cage of wealth lifting me worlds away from my damp studio apartment. My reflection in the mirrored walls was a ghost, a tired old man in a cheap jacket standing next to a lion in a $5,000 suit. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse. It was vast. It wasn't a home. It was a statement. Glass walls on two sides showed the entire glittering, rain-slicked skyline of Chicago. The city I had helped build spread out before me like a carpet I wasn't allowed to walk on. Raphael didn't offer me a drink. He didn't ask me to sit. This was not a social visit. He walked past sprawling white sofas and million-dollar art pieces straight to a study. It was dark, lined with books. He pressed a panel on the wall. A section of bookshelf clicked, and then with a hydraulic hiss, it swung open, revealing a vault. Not a small home safe, a walk-in vault, the kind you see in banks. I built this company on steel. Raphael set his hand on the massive circular door. I believe in it. He spun a dial, a series of complex clicks and whirs, and then pulled the massive lever. The door swung open, revealing not gold bars, not stacks of cash, just shelves. And on one of those shelves sat a single ancient fire-scarred metal box. It looked like it had been through a war. From the fire, Raphael said, answering my unspoken question. The only thing I salvaged from the ashes of my old shop. Your father, he put his items inside my new safe, but I kept the original box he gave me. He didn't go inside, he just pointed. He told me to wait, to watch. He knew about men like your sons, Julius. He knew the scent of them. He said, when Julius is no longer just sad, when he is hunted, then you show him, not before. He has to be ready to see. My throat was dry, ready to see what. Raphael looked at me, his dark eyes searching mine. He said, my son Julius, he's a good boy. He believes the world is fair. He believes family is everything. He doesn't have the... And then he searched for the word. He doesn't have the Garcia in him. Not yet. Raphael's eyes locked on mine. He said, one day I will be gone, and one day the vultures will come. They always do. And they won't come from the street like you're Irish. They will come from inside his own house. They will have his name. They will have his trust. He made me promise. He made me swear that if that day ever came, if I ever heard that his family, his own blood, was circling, I was to find you. I was to find Julius, and I was to give you this. He stepped aside. Julius Beaumont, I think the vultures, I think they have finally arrived. My legs felt like lead, but they carried me forward. I stepped into the vault. It smelled of cold steel and old paper. I stood in front of the box. It was an old-fashioned bank deposit box, heavy steel, blackened by soot. There was a single old-fashioned keyhole in the front. Raphael reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a key. He pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, S-sized, worn smooth with age. He opened it, and my blood ran cold. It was a ledger. Page after page of neat, precise handwriting. My father's handwriting. I recognized it from the few birthday cards I had left. But this wasn't a diary. It was accounts. Read it, Raphael said from behind me. I took the book. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold it. The first page was dated 1952. It was a list of properties, addresses I didn't recognize. 48th and Prairie, lot, $200. 16th and Blue Island, condemned 2-flat, $400. Page after page, Bronzeville, Pilsen, Garfield Park, neighborhoods that in the 50s and 60s were redlined, forgotten, left to rot. Neighborhoods that white investors wouldn't touch. What is this? I whispered. My God, Julius, Raphael said, his voice full of awe. Your father, Amos. He lived a double life. By day he was a railroad worker, a poor, invisible black man, but by night By night, he was Amos Garcia. He was a real estate investor, a silent one. I kept turning the pages. The purchases continued through the 50s. Then in the 60s, the entries changed. 16th and Blue Island, sale, $15,000. 48th and Prairie, lease, $500 month. He was buying the land, I breathed. The land the city had thrown away. He was buying the future, Raphael corrected. He knew that one day the city would have nowhere else to grow. He knew that one day these bad neighborhoods would be gentrified. He was buying the ground under their feet for pennies while they weren't looking. I was dizzy. I was leaning against the steel shelf. My father, the man who couldn't afford a new pair of shoes. The money he gave me, Raphael said. It wasn't his savings. It was his profits. He was using the shadows, using his anonymity, to build an empire under everyone's noses. I turned the page. The last page. My father's handwriting was still neat, but it looked urgent. It was dated just a week before he died. It wasn't a list of properties. It was a paragraph. All properties, accounts, and holdings under the name Amos Garcia are to be consolidated into the Amos Garcia Trust AG Trust. The sole beneficiary, my son Julius Beaumont. My breath caught. But there was more. This trust is irrevocable. It is to be protected by Rafael Castillo. It cannot be accessed, changed, or dissolved unless, in the event the sole beneficiary, Julius Beaumont, is legally declared mentally incompetent. I read the words again and again. The room was spinning. Julius. Raphael's voice sounded far away. I couldn't breathe. They did it. Did what? My sons, Terrence and Amber, the papers I signed, the day they kicked me out. They had me declared incompetent to manage my assets. I looked at Raphael, my eyes wide with a terrible dawning realization. They thought they were seizing my $1.2 million house. Raphael's eyes also went wide. He understood. Madre de Dios. They don't know. No! I said, a strange, cold power slowly uncurling in my chest. A feeling I hadn't felt in decades. It was anger. It was Garcia. They don't know, I said again, my voice stronger. In their greed to steal my house, they just unlocked the entire trust. They just gave themselves, and me, the key to everything. I looked at the blackened steel box. What's in the box, Raphael? Raphael looked at the ledger, then at the box. That Julius is the list, the real list, the bank accounts in Switzerland, the deeds, the shell corporations, everything he built. He pointed to the keyhole. And the key? I asked. Rafael Castillo finally slowly reached into his shirt. He pulled out a thin silver chain. Hanging from it was a single old-fashioned ornate brass key. He took the chain from his neck. He told me to guard this with my life. He said it didn't open the box. He said it opened the truth. He pressed the key, still warm from his skin, into my palm. Julius, he said, his voice grave, your father Amos, he didn't just leave you a fortune, he left you a fortress. And I think he just gave you the weapons to fight back. I closed my hand around the key. It was heavy. It was real. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a tired, confused old man in a cab. I was the son of Amos Garcia, and the vultures had no idea the feast was over. I shook my head, the motion jerky automatic. No, that's impossible. The words came out as a croak. My father Amos, he was a railroad worker. He was poor. We were poor. We never had any money. When he died, my mother had to scrub floors in rich white folks' houses just to keep us fed, to keep me in school. The man you're describing, this phantom benefactor, that is not my father. Raphael looked at me, not with pity, but with a deep, profound understanding. He was poor. he agreed, his voice gentle. But he was not broke. There's a vast difference, Julius. Your father was rich in a way that had nothing to do with dollars. He was rich in intelligence and in foresight. He was the smartest man I ever knew. I tried to give the money back. Raphael continued, his voice thick with the memory. I was terrified. I thought it was stolen. I said, I can't take this. Who are you? Why are you doing this? And that, Raphael said, tapping his finger on the dashboard, is when he looked at me and his eyes they weren't angry. They were dangerous. Quietly dangerous. He said, it doesn't matter who I am, but if you must call me something, call me Garcia. Garcia. I repeated the name, feeling foreign and strange. Why, that's a Spanish name. Exactly, Raphael said, and the smallest shadow of a smile touched his lips for the first time. I asked him the same thing. Why Garcia? I thought maybe he was mocking me. And your father, this tall, powerful black man, he looked down at me, this small, terrified Cuban boy, and he said, it was my mother's name, her mother's name, the name of a slave who bought her own freedom. And then he said, Raphael leaned in his voice, dropping to a whisper, I use it to remind me that we, people like us, we have to protect our own, because no one else is going to. The words, those words, they hit me like a physical blow. We have to protect our own. And I had just been devoured by my own. I thought of Terence and his cruel, calculated words. I thought of Amber with her predatory smile. I thought of my youngest son, Corey, standing in the doorway looking at the floor as they stripped me of my home, my dignity. My father had seen it. 60 years ago, he had seen this day coming. He gave me the money, Raphael said, his voice pulling me back from my dark thoughts. And he made me promise 2 things. He held up one gnarled finger. First, I was to tell no one. Not my wife, not my children, no one. He said the money was invisible. It came from the shadows, and it must stay in the shadows. He said, men like me, we cannot be seen to have power. It makes other men nervous. It makes them cruel. And I understood. I took the money. I rebuilt my shop. In 1 year, I had saved enough. I tried to pay him back. I found him at the railroad yard. I tried to give him an envelope. What happened? He refused. He pushed it back into my chest. He said, that was not a loan, son. It was an investment. In you. In us. You pay me back by succeeding. You pay me back by becoming so powerful they can never burn you again. So I did. I took that money, and I built Castillo Metals. Castillo Metals. The billion-dollar corporation. It was built on my father's secret. My father's foresight. And the second promise? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What was the second promise? Raphael's face grew somber. He turned in his seat, facing me fully, the car's dim dashboard lights carving shadows into his aged face. He said, I have a son. His name is Julius. He's a good boy, but he's soft, like his mother. He believes the world is fair. He believes family is everything. He doesn't have the... And then he searched for the word. He doesn't have the Garcia in him. Raphael's eyes locked on mine. He said, one day I will be gone, and one day the vultures will come. They always do, and they won't come from the street like you're Irish. They will come from inside his own house. They will have his name. They will have his trust. He made me promise. He made me swear that if that day ever came, if I ever heard that his family, his own blood, was circling, I was to find you. I was to find Julius. And I was to give you this. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Give me what did he leave? Raphael didn't answer. He simply said, my penthouse is in this building. I have been holding something for you, for your father, for 60 years. I have a safe, an old safe. The key is waiting. He looked at me, this stranger who knew my father better than I ever did. Julius Beaumont. I think the vultures, I think they have finally arrived. My legs felt like they were moving through wet cement, but I followed him. A Julius Beaumont, in my threadbare coat that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation, followed this man Rafael Castillo out of my taxi. He didn't just have the doorman hold the door for us. He waved the doorman away with a flick of his wrist as if he didn't want a witness to what was about to happen. We rode up in a private elevator. It was silent paneled in dark polished mahogany, and it moved with a high-speed, soundless hush. It was a cage of impossible wealth lifting me worlds away from my damp studio apartment. My reflection in the mirrored walls was a ghost, a tired old man in a cheap jacket standing next to a lion in a $5,000 suit. The elevator opened not into a hallway, but directly into his penthouse. It was vast. It wasn't a home, it was a statement. 2 entire walls were glass, revealing the whole glittering, rain-slicked skyline of Chicago. The city I had helped build spread out before me like a carpet I was no longer allowed to walk on. He walked to the window. "Castillo Metals," he said, his voice quiet, gesturing to the view. "This is what I built. All of it. Every tower, every factory, every billion. It all started from that one envelope your father handed me in the ashes. I paid him back by succeeding just as he asked." He turned his eyes full of that old sad memory. "When he died, long after, when my company was finally strong, I tried to find you. I had to find Amos's son, Julius Beaumont. I wanted to tell you what he did. I wanted you to know the kind of man your father truly was." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But I couldn't find you." What do you mean?" "I hired the best private investigators," Raphael said, his voice low. "They searched for months. Nothing. No public records, no credit history, no active driver's license. It was as if Julius Beaumont had vanished from the face of the earth. A new, different kind of chill settled over me, sharper and colder than my grief. Vanished. When Terrence and Amber had me declared incompetent when they took my signature, they didn't just take my house, they took my name. They had systematically, methodically erased me. "Erased," I whispered. The word felt like ice. My own sons. My own blood. Raphael nodded grimly. "Erased. Wiped clean. It was the work of professionals. Cold. Thorough. When my investigators told me, I feared the worst. I feared you were gone." He looked at me, his eyes full of a 60-year-old sorrow. "And now I find you, driving a cab, looking like a hunted man." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, this ghost, in this palace built on my father's secret. "They didn't just take your house, Julius," Raphael said, his voice hard. "They took your life, your identity. This is exactly what your father was afraid of." He turned from the window and walked not to a sofa, but to a massive dark wood bookcase that covered one wall. He knew the scent of them. He didn't offer me a drink. He didn't ask me to sit. This was not a social visit. This was the fulfillment of an oath. He pressed a hidden panel on the wall, a carved piece of mahogany. There was a low hydraulic hiss. A section of the bookshelf clicked, and then it swung open, revealing a vault. Not a small home safe, a walk-in vault, the kind you see in banks. The door was solid steel, circular, imposing. "I built my company on steel," Raphael said, his hand on the massive spinning wheel. "I believe in it." He spun the dial, a series of complex clicks and whirs that echoed in the silent room. He pulled a massive lever, and the door swung open with a heavy, pressurized sigh. Inside, on a single pedestal, sat a metal box. It was blackened and warped, scarred by intense heat. "From the fire," Raphael said, answering my unspoken question. "The only physical thing I salvaged from the ashes of my old shop. Your father, he asked me to keep his items. In the one thing that survived the fire, he said it was symbolic." He reached in and pulled out the box. It was heavy. He placed it on a thick wooden desk. He didn't need a key for this box. He pressed a small hidden latch on the warped metal, and the lid sprung open with a groaning squeak. Inside there was no money, no gold, just a small leather-bound ledger, its cover worn smooth with age. And resting on top of it, a single, heavy, old-fashioned bank safe deposit key. It was ornate, made of brass with a complex slotted bit. My heart was hammering. This was it, the secret. My hand was trembling. I reached out my fingers, brushing the cold brass of the key. Raphael put his hand over mine, stopping me. His hand was warm, strong. "Wait," he said. "Before you touch these, you must understand what they are." He looked me square in the eye. "Your father gave these to me the day I tried to pay him back, the day he refused the money. I told him he was a fool, that he should keep this proof with his own family, with you." Raphael's voice dropped, becoming a perfect imitation of my father's deep, quiet thunder. He looked at me and he said, "No, Raphael, you will keep it. You are a fighter. You understand the fire. My son, Julius, he is a good boy. He is soft like his mother. He believes the world is fair. He believes family is everything." My breath hitched. He said that Raphael nodded as if hearing my thoughts. He said, "He is a good man, but he is too trusting. He cannot see the knife until it is in his back. He will need this key and this book. He will need it when he finally realizes that the wolves are not just outside the door. Sometimes, Raphael, sometimes the wolves are already in the house. Sometimes they are the ones who call him Father." The words, "the wolves are already in the house," they landed like hammer blows. He knew. My God, he knew. He had seen Terrence. He had seen Amber. He had seen this betrayal coming 60 years ago. Raphael pushed the box gently toward me. He told me to wait, to watch. He said, "When Julius is no longer just sad, when he is hunted, then you show him, not before. He has to be ready to see the truth." Rafael Castillo looked at me, this old, powerful billionaire, his eyes filled with a lifetime of loyalty to a dead man. "Julius Beaumont," he said, his voice heavy. "I have found you. You are a hunted man. I think the vultures have finally arrived." I didn't take a cab back. I couldn't. I walked. I walked for miles through the glittering rain-washed streets of the Gold Coast south past the river. The key, a heavy, solid weight in my pocket, the leather-bound ledger clutched in my hand under my jacket like a shield. The city I saw was different. It wasn't just concrete and steel anymore. It was a game board, a territory, and I was just realizing at 70 years old that my father had been its most brilliant player. When I finally got back to my studio apartment, the smell of damp and old cooking grease was a slap in the face. It was a prison, a box, but it was also a war room. I locked the flimsy door, sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, and under the weak yellow light of a single bulb, I opened the book. My hands were steady now. The trembling was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus I hadn't felt since before Diane got sick, since I was a man who built things. The first page was dated 1952, my father's handwriting. Neat, precise, the script of an engineer. It was a list, addresses and numbers. 48th and Prairie, condemned lot, $200. 16th and Blue Island, burned 2 flat, $400 cash. Garfield Park, tax lien, $150. Page after page, Bronzeville, Pilsen, East Garfield Park, Woodlawn. My God, I knew these neighborhoods. In the 1950s and 60s, this was the forgotten city. This was the land the white investors wouldn't touch. These were the red-lined, crumbling slum properties that the city had left to rot. He was buying the garbage. He was buying the ashes. But he wasn't. He was buying the land. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. For almost 20 years, he had bought and bought and bought. Tiny parcels, condemned buildings, empty lots, things no one else wanted. He was paying pennies on the dollar for the ground beneath their feet. And then in the late 60s, the entries changed. 48th and Prairie, lease, $500 a month. 16th and Blue Island, sale, $15,000. I did the math. A $400 investment sold for $15,000, a return of over 3,000%. I sat back, my breath caught in my chest. My father, Amos Beaumont, the quiet, tired man who worked on the railroad, who came home smelling of machine oil and tobacco, who died in a worn-out coat on a factory floor. He had been living a double life. By day, he was Amos Beaumont, the invisible black man, the laborer earning a steady, respectable, poor paycheck. but by night, he was Amos Garcia. I remembered Raphael's words. It was my mother's name, the name of a slave who got herself free. My grandmother, a woman I'd never met, an Afro-Latina woman whose name he had used as a shield, a corporate identity, a ghost in the system. He had used his invisibility as a weapon. While the white investors were looking at the suburbs at the new highways, my father, Garcia, was looking at the heart of the city. He knew. As an engineer, I understood it instantly. He knew that a city is a living thing. It must expand, and eventually it must turn and eat its own blighted-out core. He knew that one day Bronzeville and Pilsen wouldn't be the slums. They would be up and coming. They would be vintage. They would be valuable. The man I remembered who patched his own shoes with rubber, who told my mother to turn the heat down to save money. That man was a fiction, a performance, a brilliant, patient, long-term performance. He was a silent, ruthless investor. He was a genius. And this book, this was his empire. I kept turning the pages. My mind, trained for decades in engineering and mathematics, started to do the calculations. And the numbers were staggering. A lot in Bronzeville bought for $200 in 1952. I knew that block. I had driven past it 100 times in my cab. A new glass and steel condo tower stood there now. That $200 lot, it was worth $5, maybe $6 million, minimum. A burned-out two-flat in Pilsen bought for $400. Pilsen. It was now one of the hottest, trendiest neighborhoods in the city. That land, it was priceless. Page after page, the numbers grew. A small parcel here. A condemned building there. It was an empire. A secret, silent empire built of brick, stone, and foresight, hidden in plain sight right under the noses of the entire city. My father hadn't just been buying land. He had been curating a portfolio of the future. I saw leases for cell phone towers, commercial rental agreements, mineral rights on parcels of land I'd never even heard of. He hadn't just bought and held. He had cultivated. I flipped faster, my hands shaking again, but not from weakness, from shock. The last few pages weren't properties. They were account numbers, banks, not in Chicago, in Switzerland, in the Cayman Islands, accounts under the name A. Garcia Trust. And the balances, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't thousands, it wasn't even hundreds of thousands. I was looking at millions, 10 million, 20, 30. I added the numbers in my head, my engineer's brain clicking and whirring, trying to process a reality it wasn't built for. The properties, the cash. It was 40, at least. $42 million. I sat there in my $1,500 a month studio apartment staring at a number that didn't seem real. $42 million. My father. The man in the patched shoes. The man who died with holes in his socks. He had been a phantom, a performance, and he had left me this, a fortress, a kingdom. And I, his son, his soft son. I had been driving a cab, my back aching, terrified of a dental bill, while my other sons, a cold, hard fury, a feeling I hadn't felt in my entire 70 years, began to uncurl in my stomach. It was a cold, clean, righteous anger. It was the Garcia in me waking up. I turned to the last page. It was different from the others. The neat, precise script was still there, but it was formatted. It was legal. It was a declaration. It was dated 1 week before he died. He must have known. He must have felt his heart giving out. It read, "All properties, accounts, and holdings, liquid and physical, under the name Amos Garcia, or any associated shell corporations, are hereby and forever consolidated into the Amos Garcia Trust, also known as the AG Trust. This trust is irrevocable." My eyes scanned the next line. "The sole beneficiary of the AG Trust is my son, Julius Amos Beaumont." I was the only one. He hadn't left it to my mother. He knew she wouldn't know what to do with it. He had left it all to me. But it was the next paragraph that made the blood freeze in my veins. "The AG Trust is to be protected by the appointed guardian Rafael Castillo of Chicago, Illinois. The trust cannot be accessed, changed, dissolved, or activated except by the fulfillment of one of the following two conditions. 1. The joint verified signatures of the beneficiary Julius Amos Beaumont and the guardian, Rafael Castillo. or 2. A legally binding court-certified declaration that the beneficiary Julius Amos Beaumont has been deemed mentally incompetent or otherwise incapacitated and is no longer able to manage his own affairs. I read the words again. And a third time. A slow, cold, terrible smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated, ice-cold clarity. Terrence, Amber, they thought they were so smart. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had used their fake concern, their legal threats, their psychological warfare to bully me into signing those papers, to have me declared confused, incompetent. They thought they were seizing my $1.2 million house. They thought they were managing my meager city pension. They had no idea. They had no idea what they had just done, in their greed, in their arrogance. They had walked right into my father's trap. They had, with their own perfectly legal, perfectly predatory actions, just fulfilled condition number 2. They didn't just steal my house. They had just accidentally unlocked the entire $42 million trust. They had just given themselves, and me, the key to the whole damned kingdom. They just had no idea that I, the real beneficiary, was standing right behind them. I sat there on the lumpy mattress, the $42 million man, in a room that smelled like failure. The key was heavy in my hand. The ledger was open on my lap. I had the truth. I had the power. But my father was a smart man. And I, Julius Beaumont, was a smart man. I was an engineer. I knew that you don't build a bridge without a blueprint, and you don't go to war without an army. Terrence and Amber were professionals. They had lawyers. They had erased me from public record. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a high-stakes legal war, and they had fired the first shot not knowing they had just handed me an arsenal. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my sons. I called the one number I had. I called Rafael Castillo. He answered on the first ring as if he was waiting. "Julius, I've read the book," I said, my voice low and steady. I understand what he did. I understand what they did. Condition 2, they triggered it, Rafael. They triggered the whole damned thing. There was a long silence on the other end, then a low, slow whistle. Madre de Dios. The fools. The arrogant, greedy fools. They walked right into it. They did, I said. But now they are in control of it. Legally. They have the court order saying I'm incompetent. They think they're managing a $1 million trust. They don't know they're sitting on $42 million. I need help, Rafael. I'm an engineer. I'm not this. No. Raphael's voice came back, and it was no longer the voice of a sad old man. It was the voice of the CEO of Castillo Metals. It was cold. It was hard. It was Garcia. "You are an engineer, Julius, and we are going to build a case, a fortress, and then we are going to tear them down brick by brick. You are not alone in this. Amos protected me. Now I will protect you." He said, "I have a lawyer. She is not like the old men in suits. She is young, she is brilliant, and she is a shark. The best real estate and trust lawyer in Chicago. Her name is Kendra Shaw." "Kendra Shaw," I repeated. "Be at her office." 1 hour, Raphael said. "And Julius, bring the book, bring the key, and wear your Uber jacket." "What, why?" "Because," Raphael said, a cold smile in his voice, "I want Ms. Shaw to see exactly who they are trying to rob." And he hung up. 1 hour later, I was standing in a different world. Kendra Shaw's office wasn't old and dusty, filled with rows of leather-bound books. It was on the 55th floor of a glass tower that scraped the sky. It was all white marble steel and sweeping, arrogant views of Lake Michigan. The receptionist looked at me in my faded blue Uber jacket, then at Raphael in his $5,000 suit, and didn't blink. She just said, "Ms. Shaw is waiting for you." Kendra Shaw was not what I expected. She was young, maybe 35. She wore a sharp crimson suit, and her hair was pulled back in immaculate tight locks. She commanded the room. She stood when Raphael entered, shook his hand firmly, but her eyes were on me. "Mr. Beaumont." "A pleasure." She didn't have pity in her eyes. She had focus, an unnerving, intelligent focus. We sat at a massive glass conference table. Raphael started to speak. "Kendra, This is a delicate family matter. Mr. Beaumont has been the victim of... She held up a single perfectly manicured hand. Let the documents speak first, Raphael. They're always more honest than the people. My hand was shaking again, but I did as I was told. I slid the worn, leather-bound ledger across the glass. It looked ancient, out of place in this sterile modern room. Then I placed the heavy, ornate brass key next to it. Kendra Shaw didn't look at the key. She opened the ledger. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the whisper of her fingers turning the old, brittle pages. She read the property lists. She read the bank account numbers from Switzerland. Her eyes widened just slightly, but she controlled it. Then she got to the last page, the declaration. She read the irrevocable clause. She read Condition 1, the joint verified signatures of the beneficiary Julius Amos Beaumont and the guardian Rafael Castillo. Then she read Condition 2. Her eyes narrowed. A legally binding court-certified declaration that the beneficiary has been deemed mentally incompetent. She read it again, and a third time. She slowly, deliberately closed the book. She looked at Raphael. Then she looked at me, sitting there in my driver's jacket. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just found blood in the water. Mr. Beaumont, she said, her voice quiet, but it filled the entire room. I have handled billionaires. I have handled old money estates. I have handled international con artists. But your father was a legal artist. This, she tapped the ledger, this is a fortress, a masterpiece. She leaned forward. This document, this trust, it's ironclad. An irrevocable trust is a dragon. You can't break it. You can't change it. You can only do what the Creator, your father, Moshe, told it to do. And he left 2 keys. She pointed at me, then at Raphael. Condition 1, you two together. She then tapped the page where Condition 2 was written. And then there's the in case of emergency break glass key, the incapacity clause. Mr. Beaumont, your sons had you declared incompetent, didn't they? It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I just knotted my throat too tight to speak. They sold my house. Kendra's smile vanished. No, she said, her voice suddenly sharp as glass. They didn't. I blinked. What? But they did. I'm in a studio apartment. They sold it. For $1.2 million. Mr. Beaumont, she said, turning to her computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. This is the genius of it. This is the part that will not just get your money back. This is the part that will destroy them. A property record flashed onto a huge monitor on the wall. It was my house, my home, the brick 2-flat with the rose bushes Diane had planted. Your father Amos, or Amos Garcia as the legal entity, purchased this property in 1958. It was immediately placed into the AG Trust. It has not moved. It has been owned by that trust for over 60 years. It was never in your name. It was never in your wife's name. But we lived there, I stammered. For 45 years. Diane, your father, Kendra interrupted, pulling up another document, was thorough. He granted your mother and then you and your wife, Diane, lifetime residency rights. It's a legal term. It means you had the right to live there undisturbed until you passed away. But the ownership, the deed, never belonged to you. It always belonged to the trust. The moment your wife Diane passed away, her lifetime rights were extinguished. The only entity on this planet with any claim to that house was the AG Trust itself. She let that sink in. The air left my lungs. So, she continued, when your sons Terrence and Amber had you declared incompetent, they weren't just stealing your house. She turned to face me fully. They were stealing from the trust, a trust they now, thanks to their own fraudulent court order, technically control. I stared at the property record on the huge screen, my mind racing. So they committed a crime, selling the house. It wasn't theirs. We can just call the police, arrest them. Kendra leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingertips together. Not yet. she said, her voice a sharp cutting edge. This is the complex part, Mr. Beaumont. This is the part your father anticipated. Yes, they committed a massive crime, fraudulent sale of a trust asset. It's a federal offense. But, she held up a single finger, silencing me. They did it after a court legally declared you incompetent. Which means, right now, in the eyes of the law, they are the legal administrators of the AG Trust. They have the paperwork signed by a judge giving them control over all of your affairs, including the trust they didn't even know existed. My head was spinning. So, they win. They have the 42 million. Just like that. No, Kendra said, her voice dropping, becoming hard as the marble table. They control it, for now. They think they're managing a $1 million fund, but they are legally entitled to manage the whole 42 million. But they made a fatal, greedy mistake. They overplayed their hand. They sold an asset. That action, that sale, that is our opening. But how? I asked, my voice desperate. We don't go after the sale first, she explained, leaning forward. That's their symptom. We go after the disease. Our primary target is the lie that gave them control in the first place. Right now, the Commonwealth of Illinois says you are Julius Beaumont, an incompetent man. The law says Terrence and Amber are your loving, concerned protectors. That's a lie. I growled, the word tearing from my throat. Exactly. Kendra's eyes flashed. And that is what we are going to prove. We don't just need to prove they sold the house. We need to prove why they did it. We need to prove Condition 2 was triggered by calculated fraud. We need to prove unequivocally that you are perfectly sane, perfectly competent, and that they knew you were. We have to prove they lied to a judge with malicious intent for one reason and one reason only, to steal your assets. She stood up, looking down at me, at the man in the Uber jacket. The battle isn't for the house, Mr. Beaumont. The battle is for your mind. We have to undo that court order. And to do that, we need to prove their intent. We need to catch them in the act. I looked at Kendra, then at Raphael. Catch them. But how? They'll lie. They'll say they were concerned, that they were protecting me from myself. It's my word against theirs. They have a judge's signature. I'm just an old man in an Uber jacket. They'll say I'm confused. They'll say this ledger is just another one of my delusions. Kendra leaned back in her chair. She was not concerned. Mr. Beaumont, you can't prove their intent by looking at the past. They've already built their defense. They were concerned. They were worried. They loved you. Blah, blah, blah. She tapped her pen on the glass table. We have to make them prove their intent in the present. What? What do you mean? Right now. Kendra explained, her voice quick and precise. They are legally managing what they think is a $1.2 million fund. They're greedy, but they're comfortable. They think they've already won. We need to destabilize that. We need to make them more greedy. Raphael, who had been silent, leaned forward, his eyes bright. You mean we set a trap? Kendra smiled, that cold, brilliant, beautiful smile. Exactly, Mr. Castillo. We don't just sit here. We bait the trap. They think they're in control of the assets of a confused old man. Fine. Let's give that confused old man another asset. What? We dangle something new, she said. Something valuable but obscure. Something they'll want to snatch up fast using the exact same legal excuse of your incompetence. We need to get them on tape. We need to get them in a room on record confirming that they are in charge of your assets and that they are actively, willingly seizing more. What kind of asset? I asked. Something simple, Kendra said, already thinking fast. Something plausible. Old stock certificates found in a shoebox from a company that doesn't exist anymore. Something that sounds like a lottery ticket. Something a confused old man would find, and something a pair of greedy administrators would want to absorb into their trust immediately. She looked at me. Mr. Beaumont, how good of an actor are you? My heart was pounding. I was 70 years old. I was an engineer. I wasn't a spy. Kendra saw the hesitation on my face. Her voice became hard as steel. They lied to a judge, Mr. Beaumont. They lied about your mind. They put you in a damp room while they sold your home. You are not lying. You are holding up a mirror. Now, dial the number. Her office was a command center. A sophisticated recording device was active in the center of the glass table. Raphael sat in one corner, silent, watching. Kendra stood by the window, a shark in her own aquarium. I dialed Terrence's number. My hand was shaking. I pressed the speakerphone button. The room was deathly quiet. 1 ring, 2. "Dad," Terrence's voice. That same impatient, dismissive tone. "What, I'm busy. You're not supposed to be calling this line." I took a shaky breath. I looked at Kendra. She nodded. "Go." I made my voice weak, trembling, the voice of the old man they believed me to be. "Terrence, son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm at a lawyer's office." The change on the line was instant. The impatience vanished, replaced by a sharp, cold alarm. "A lawyer? What lawyer?" "Dad, what did you do? You are not supposed to be talking to lawyers. We are your lawyers. Amber and I handle your affairs." I know, son. I know. I'm confused." I stammered the words tasting like poison. "It's just, I found some papers in a box from Grandpa Amos, from my father." I let my voice trail off as if I'd forgotten what I was saying. What papers, Dad?" Terrence's voice was tight. They look like old stocks, old paper stocks. I don't understand them. The lady here, this lawyer, Ms. Shaw, she said we need to have a meeting, that they might be valuable." The line went dead quiet. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the click of his office keyboard in the background. I could practically hear the gears of greed turning in his head. "Stocks?" His voice was no longer alarmed. It was sharp, focused, predatory. "What stocks? What company?" "Dad, where are you exactly? Don't say anything else to that woman. Don't sign anything. You are not competent to sign anything. Remember, we are your guardians." I'm at her office, on Wacker Drive." "Stay there," he commanded. "Don't move. Don't speak. Amber and I will be right there. We will handle this. We will handle your lawyer." He hung up. I stared at the phone. My heart was pounding like a drum. It was the most disgusting, violating performance of my life. And it had worked. Perfectly. Raphael let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding for a minute. "He's coming." Kendra Shaw walked over and clicked off the recorder. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine respect. "Oh, they're coming," she said, her own cold smile returning. "The fish didn't just bite the hook, Mr. Beaumont. He's trying to swallow the whole boat. Let's get the conference room ready." 20 minutes later, the door to the conference room opened. Terrence and Amber swept in. They weren't just walking, they were making an entrance. They were a unified force of expensive suits and calculated arrogance. They stopped when they saw Kendra, a young black woman, standing at the head of the table. Amber's eyes swept over Kendra's crimson suit with a look of barely concealed disdain, as if she were a particularly bright piece of furniture. Then they saw me sitting at the table in my Uber jacket, and their expressions tightened. "Dad," Terrence said, his voice sharp. "What is this? You're not supposed to be here. We told you to wait." Amber didn't even look at me. She addressed Kendra directly, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm Amber Beaumont, and this is my husband, Terrence. We are Mr. Beaumont's legal guardians and administrators of his estate. I'm sure you understand he's unwell. He gets confused. So whatever stocks he thinks he found, we'll take a look at the paperwork. We're here to sign whatever needs to be signed for him. He is not legally competent to make his own decisions." She smiled a thin, patronizing smile. "So if you'll just hand over the documents, we can all get on with our day." Kendra Shaw smiled back. It was a beautiful, terrifying smile. "Of course, Mrs. Beaumont. Thank you for coming in on such short notice. I'm Kendra Shaw, and you are absolutely right. There are some documents here that require the administrator's attention. Please sit." She gestured to the 2 empty chairs opposite me. Terrence and Amber sat pulling their chairs and projecting an air of total control. Kendra slid a document across the glass table. It wasn't a single stock certificate. It was a thick, bound report, about 30 pages. Amber picked it up, her expression annoyed, as if this was all a waste of her valuable time. Terrence leaned in to look over her shoulder. "What is this?" Amber asked, flipping past the cover sheet. "This isn't a stock." "No," Kendra said, her voice pleasant. "It's not. That's just a summary, an inventory, if you will, of the assets you've been managing for the last 6 months. For Mr. Beaumont's benefit, of course. We just wanted to make sure your records were complete." Amber's eyes narrowed. She started to read. Terrence read along his brow, furrowing. What is this?" Amber said again, her voice losing its smooth condescension. "The Amos Garcia Trust. What is that?" "Keep reading," Kendra said softly. Amber flipped the page. "Property, 48th and Prairie. Assessed value, $5.2 million. She flipped again. "Property, 16th and Blue Island, $3.8 million. Her breathing quickened. She flipped faster, her manicured finger jabbing at the pages. "Property, 15 properties. What? Terrence, what is this? This isn't his, isn't it?" Kendra asked. "It seems to be in the trust, the one you now control." Terrence's face was pale. He grabbed the report from her. He flipped past the real estate holdings. He got to the last page, the summary of liquid assets. A bank," he stammered. "A bank in Zurich, a Swiss bank account." Amber snatched the paper back. She read the number at the bottom of the page, the final tally, the total assets of the Amos Garcia Trust. She didn't speak. She just made a small sound, a tiny strangled gasp. Her eyes wide with shock, and a new, terrible hunger shot up from the paper. They weren't looking at Kendra. They were looking at me. 42? Terrence whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at me, his eyes full of a dazed, frantic confusion. $42 million. Amber's knuckles were white as she gripped the report. "You!" she hissed at me, her voice shaking, all pretense of concern gone, replaced by pure, venomous greed. You knew about this." The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. $42 million. The number just hung in the air, a glowing, monstrous figure. Amber's knuckles were white, her whole body vibrating with a greed so raw it was almost primal. She was looking at me, but she wasn't seeing her father-in-law. She was seeing an obstacle, an old, confused man who was somehow standing between her and a fortune. Terrence, my son, my boy. His face was a mask of pale, dazed confusion. "Dad," he stammered, his voice a child's voice. "Dad, you knew about this." I looked at him. I looked at my son, the man he had become. I looked at his wife, the predator she had always been. All the grief, all the fear, all the humiliation of the past 6 months. It vanished, and in its place a cold, hard, clean feeling. It was the feeling of an engineer seeing a bridge's critical flaw. It was the feeling of Garcia. I uncrossed my legs. I straightened my back. And for the first time in a year, I spoke in my own voice. Not the voice of a victim, not the voice of a confused old man, but the voice of Julius Beaumont, the voice of Amos Garcia's son. "No, Terrence." I said, my voice clear and strong. It didn't tremble. It didn't crack. It sliced through the silent room. "No, I didn't know. I didn't know about the money. I didn't know my father was a genius, but I did always know who you were." His face, it changed. The dazed confusion, it vanished. He finally understood. He finally saw me. He saw the man in his Uber jacket. He saw the lawyer at the head of the table. He saw the $42 million report. And he realized it was a trap. The color drained from his face, replaced by a flush of pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't yell at me. He turned on Kendra. He sprang to his feet, his chair screeching backward. "You!" he roared, jabbing a finger at her. "You can't do this. You have no right. I have the legal papers. I have a court order. He pointed at me, his hand shaking with fury. "He is mentally incompetent. He is not of sound mind. We are his guardians. We control this trust." He signed the papers. He was shouting, his voice echoing in the pristine glass room. "He signed them. It's legal. You can't touch us. He's incompetent." Kendra. Shaw did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She stood calm and cold and looked at my son. "Thank you, Mr. Beaumont," she said, her voice cutting through his tirade. Thank you for confirming on record that you knew your father was incompetent and that you still intended to seize control of this $42 million trust for his benefit. Terrence's mouth snapped shut. He didn't understand. Kendra reached down to a small silver button on the conference table's console. She pressed it. On record. Amber whispered, her face ashen. What does she mean? The heavy glass door to the conference room hissed open. Terrence and Amber turned. Rafael Castillo walked in. But he was not alone. Flanking him were two men hard-faced in dark suits. They were not lawyers. They had the unmistakable, weary authority of law enforcement. Behind them, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror, was my other son, Corey. Terrence looked at the men, then at Corey. Corey, what the hell are you doing here? Who are these men? Kendra Shaw's voice filled the room. It was no longer the voice of a lawyer. It was the voice of a prosecutor. Mr. Terrence Beaumont, Ms. Amber Beaumont, she said, meet Detective Miller and Detective Sanchez, Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. Gentlemen, she said, gesturing to my son and his wife. Thank you for coming. Kendra picked up the thick report from the table. These individuals, Terrence and Amber Beaumont, have just on audio and video recording confirmed their intent. They have confirmed that they are the legal guardians of this incompetent man, she pointed at me, and they have just in the last 5 minutes attempted to seize administrative control over a newly discovered $42 million trust. Amber shot to her feet. This is insane. We're his guardians. We were protecting his assets. Is that, Kendra asked, her voice dangerously soft, why you sold his house, a house that was already in the trust, a house that was never, ever yours to sell? Amber's face crumpled. What? Detective, Kendra continued. Mr. and Ms. Beaumont here used a fraudulent court order based on lies about their father's mental state to gain control of his assets. They sold his primary residence, an asset of the AG Trust, in a clear case of elder fraud and criminal mismanagement of a trust. They did not know the trust was worth $42 million, but their intent to defraud is the same, and they have just confirmed it. Terrence's world was collapsing. He looked around, desperate. His eyes landed on his brother. Corey, tell them. Tell them, Dad was confused. Tell them we were just trying to help. Corey looked at his brother. He was trembling. But for the first time in his life, he didn't look away. He looked at Terrence. I can't, Terrence, I can't. I told them what you and Amber, what you said about managing Dad, about the house. It was then I understood. Kendra hadn't just been waiting for Terrence. She had already found the weak link. She had found Corey. She had given him a chance to save himself. Amber let out a sound. It was not a word, it was a scream, a high, thin animal sound of pure rage. Corey, you traitor, you weak, pathetic. Terrence didn't scream. He just broke. The realization that he had lost, that he had been outplayed, outthought by the confused old man in the Uber jacket. He turned his face a mask of primal, childish rage. He didn't lunge at the detectives. He didn't lunge at Kendra. He lunged at me. You old, you... He never made it. He was a finance guy, not a fighter. Detective Miller had his arm behind his back in a half second. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Amber didn't fight. She just sank into the expensive chair, her face white, her eyes dead. She just stared at the $42 million report on the table, a feast she would never get to taste. Detective Sanchez walked over to her. Ma'am, you'll need to stand up. They were cuffed. My sons, my son and his wife. They were led out of the conference room. Terrence was still muttering, he's incompetent. It's legal. I have the papers. The door hissed shut, and it was quiet. It was just me, and Raphael, and Corey, who was crying silently in the corner, and Kendra Shaw. She walked over. She picked up the thick, bound report. She slid it across the table to me. Mr. Beaumont, she said, I believe this belongs to you. Terrence and Amber's fall was as swift as it was total. They were not just fighting me, they were fighting the AG Trust, and as Kendra put it, the trust has deeper pockets. They faced a mountain of charges: elder fraud, Criminal mismanagement of a trust, conspiracy, the sale of the house. That was the nail in their coffin. It was deemed a fraudulent conveyance. The poor man who had bought it. He didn't lose the house to me because it was never legally his. It was returned to the trust its rightful owner. He in turn sued my son and daughter-in-law for the $1.2 million they had stolen from him. They lost everything. The house they lived in, their cars, their reputations. They were bankrupted legally and morally before the criminal trial even began. I don't drive a taxi anymore. Today I am standing in my own kitchen. The smell of coffee is in the air, not stale cigarettes. The house is quiet, but it's not the heavy, suffocating silence of grief. It's peace. Corey is here. He's not sitting. He's working. He's scrubbing the floor, the same floor he stared at while my life was being stolen. He didn't go to jail. His testimony, his remorse, it saved him from that. But he will not see a single penny of my father's money. I gave him a choice. Jail or a new start, a real start. Raphael gave him a job. A bottom-level, back-breaking job at a Castillo Metals foundry. He works 12-hour shifts covered in grease, earning a minimum wage. He comes here on Sundays to help, to try. I looked at him this morning. He's thinner, but his eyes are clearer. You have to earn it back, Corey, I told him, my voice not unkind but firm. Not the money, the respect. You start with earning your own. He just nodded and went back to scrubbing the floor. My story. It doesn't end here in this house. It ends here on the south side. I'm standing with Raphael, a cold wind whipping at our coats, but we're warm. We're looking at a brand new building. It's not a glass tower, it's brick and warm wood. The sign above the door reads, the Garcia Beaumont Foundation. I used the $42 million. I used it to finish what my father started. This building, it's the first of many. It provides low-interest loans for Black and Latino entrepreneurs. It offers grants for affordable housing. It's not a fortress of money. It's a fortress of opportunity. My father Amos left me a legacy. He used the name of a freed slave to build a secret kingdom to protect his soft son. He knew I didn't have the Garcia in me, but he was wrong. It was just sleeping. At 70 years old, I finally learned how to fight. The vultures were beaten, and now the legacy of Garcia will protect all of us. What I've learned from this, what I carry with me every day, is a hard and painful lesson. It taught me that the deepest betrayals often come not from enemies, but from those who share your name and eat at your table. Greed can sever bonds that should be unbreakable. But my father Amos taught me something more. He taught me that true strength isn't about the absence of weakness. It's about building a fortress even in secret to protect what matters. It is never ever too late to find your own strength, to learn how to fight, and to reclaim your dignity. Even at 70 years old, the Garcia inside you can wake up. What would you have done if you had discovered your father's $42 million secret? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.